Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The EU has criticized US President Donald Trump's decision to restrict travel from Europe over the coronavirus. In a statement, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Council President Charles Michel said the decision was taken without consultation. The statement said the coronavirus is a global crisis and it requires cooperation rather than unilateral action. It added the EU is taking strong action to limit the spread of the virus. Earlier, Trump imposed sweeping restrictions on travel from Europe for 30 days, hitting airlines and heightening global alarm. The move sent markets into a tailspin, with European shares plunging to their lowest in almost 4 years and oil also slumping. It also sent stressed travelers rushing to airports to board lost flights back to the US. Iran has asked the International Monetary Fund for $5 billion to help Tehran fight coronavirus outbreak. The demand comes after the IMF announced that the countries affected by COVID-19 will be supported via rapid financial instrument. Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said the Monetary Fund's board should adhere to its mandate, stand on the right side of the history, and act responsibly. The Foreign Minister said Iran's central bank has requested access to the facility immediately. The death toll from the new coronavirus in Iran has risen to 429, with over 10,000 people infected nationwide. Turkey says it has largely reached an agreement with Russia on details of a ceasefire in Syria's Idlib region. A Russian delegation is in Ankara discussing the details, including a security corridor and joint patrols on the key M4 highway. Speaking to reporters in Ankara, Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said Turkish forces will maintain their presence on the southern border. He said military-level talks between both the countries are still underway in Ankara. Echoing Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's warnings, Akar said Turkey will continue its military offensive in Idlib if the ceasefire is violated. Last week, Turkey and Russia agreed on the truce to halt the escalation of violence in Idlib. Turkey says it has killed 13 Kurdistan Workers' Party militants in northern Syria and Iraq. The Defense Ministry says 8 fighters were killed in Syria's Operation Peace Spring. It said the military killed 5 others in operations backed by air power in Iraq's Medina and Gara regions. The ministry said Turkey will continue destroying weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says over attacks on medical facilities have killed 470 patients in Syria over the past 4 years. In a report, the UN health body says 494 attacks were carried out in exchange of assaults between Syria's warring sides. The WHO said the Syrian conflict has been one of the worst examples of violence affecting healthcare for years. It said the sites where the sick and wounded are treated have been prohibited under international humanitarian law. The UN Health Agency said the attacks were conducted in Idlib, Aleppo, and Hama provinces. Close to 1 million people have been displaced by the warring sides' offensives. The UK has demanded Iraq to take action against those responsible for a rocket attack that killed 1 British and 2 American personnel yesterday. In a statement, British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab welcomed Iraq's president's call for an investigation into the attack. Raab said he has spoken with the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and they agreed that it is essential to defend against these acts. Earlier, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson issued a statement condemning the attack. He said the UK will continue to cooperate with its international partners to understand the details of the attack. Iraq's presidency also condemned the attack, saying this aggression targets country's security. In recent months, tensions between Washington and Tehran have mostly played out on Iraqi soil. Iran-backed paramilitary groups have regularly been shelling bases in Iraq that host US forces and the area around the US embassy in Baghdad. The U.S. House of Representatives has approved a resolution limiting President Donald Trump's ability to wage war against Iran. With a handful of Republicans, the House voted 227 to 186 in favor of the legislation, which now goes to the White House for the president's approval. The measure means Trump must ask for congressional approval before engaging in further military action against Iran. Supporters of the resolution said they wanted to ensure Congress's power to declare war is unique, as outlined in the U.S. Constitution. Democrat Senator Tim Kaine, who introduced the resolution, said if Trump is serious about his promise to stop endless wars, he should sign it into law. It is virtually certain that Trump will veto the legislation. The coalition, which is mostly Democrats and a few Republicans, lack the votes needed to override him. The US has accused Iran of not sharing detailed information regarding one of its sites with the International Atomic Energy Agency. In a statement to IAEA's Board of Governors meeting, Washington alleged that Tehran is stockpiling uranium at the site. The US said Iran has refused to address the agency's questions regarding possible undeclared uranium at a heavily sanitized location. Earlier, IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi said Iran's refusal to give UN nuclear inspectors access to certain sites is a serious matter. Grossi said the UN nuclear watchdog was only requesting the access under existing protocols. Rejecting the allegations, Tehran has argued that IAEA's suspicions are based on fabricated Israeli intelligence. The UN has called on Afghan politicians to create a comprehensive government that is acceptable to everyone. UN's Special Envoy, Tadamichi Yamamoto, met with former Chief Executive Abdullah in Kabul. During the meeting, Yamamoto urged Abdullah to work toward a reconciliatory process which can resolve the political crisis. He said the current standoff between Abdullah and President Ashraf Ghani needs to be resolved in line with the Afghan constitution. Earlier this week, Abdullah and Ghani both swore themselves in as presidents of Afghanistan. Ghani is backed by the Election Commission and the US, while Abdullah enjoys the support of Rashid Dostum. Pakistan has criticized India's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party for not condemning violence against Muslims in New Delhi. In its weekly press briefing, the Foreign Office asked New Delhi to end its anti-minority policies. Spokesperson Aisha Farooqi said the desecration of Quran and holy places, including mosques and a shrine, has been reported in Delhi. Discussing the occupied Kashmir issue, she said Pakistan condemns continued barbarism by Indian forces in the valley. Earlier, Foreign Secretary Suhail Mahmood met diplomats of 24 countries from Africa, Eastern Europe, South Asia, and the Middle East. During the meeting, Mahmood highlighted Islamabad's efforts for peace and development. He apprised the envoys on the country's perspective on the Kashmir dispute, Afghan peace, and reconciliation efforts in the Middle East. In Pakistan, the National Assembly has passed a child abuse law with a majority vote. Earlier, the Senate gave its approval to the legislation that seeks to expedite probes and punishments for perpetrators. Under the Zainab Alert Response and Recovery Bill 2019, the police are bound to register a case within 2 hours of parents reporting a child missing. It includes measures to speed up the process, establishment of a helpline, and a new agency to issue alerts for a missing child. The law says the minimum punishment to child sex abusers will be a sentence of 7 years, and maximum will be the death sentence or life imprisonment. The bill has been named after a 6-year-old girl, Zainab, who was kidnapped, raped, and killed in 2018. World rights bodies have called for action to end the grave human rights situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. In a joint statement at the UN, the International Commission of Jurists, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International have highlighted Indian atrocities in the valley. They said 3 former chief ministers and pro-freedom leaders remain in detention under the controversial Public Safety Act. The international bodies asked India to ensure independent observers and foreign journalists had free access to the valley and could carry out their work without fear. They asked the Indian government to release everyone detained without charge and remove restrictions on rights to freedom of expression and of movement. They urged the UN to establish an independent international investigation mechanism into crimes in Kashmir. The valley has been reeling under India's curfew and the communications blackout for 221 days. In India, the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party has ambushed the democratically elected government of its opposition in the state of Madhya Pradesh. After a one-on-one meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's right hand, Amit Shah, Congress's top leader Jyotiraditya Scindia and 22 of his loyalists resigned. The defection is highly likely to topple the Congress government in Madhya Pradesh state. After a day of high drama in the state, Scindia joined the ruling party after meeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi a day earlier. On Monday, the drama began when at least 17 Congress legislators said to be loyal to Scindia resigned and went incommunicado. Since Scindia's resignation, 5 more Congress legislators have resigned, but the Speaker has not accepted any of the 22 resignations. Last year in July, BJP grabbed the Karnataka state in similar fashion after toppling opposition alliance government. Global media watchdog Reporters Without Borders has added India to the list of digital predators stifling free speech. In a report, RSF named countries which use digital technology to spy on and harass journalists, jeopardizing access to news. In the report, the body included Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's trolls of calls for rape and death threats to journalists. It also identified the Indian Ministry of Home Affairs for limiting access to information by disconnecting the internet in occupied Kashmir. It said Hindutva supporters are trying to purge all the manifestations of so-called anti-national thought from the national debate. The body said online harassment campaigns are particularly virulent when the targets are women. It's time for a short break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Russia says all the sides have agreed to endorse a new mechanism for settling the Donbass conflict at its next meeting on 25th of March. At the meeting in Minsk, the trilateral group backed agreements on preparing for the disengagement of forces and a prisoner swap in the near future. The deputy chief of the Russian presidential staff, Dmitry Kozak, said they also agreed on cooperating to find political solutions to the conflict. He described the Minsk meeting as constructive, saying he hopes the next meeting of the contact group will make a final decision. Kozak said the new proposal is aimed at creating a dialogue platform involving countries of the Normandy format and conflicting sides. Fighting between Ukrainian forces and the Russian-backed fighters in Donbass has killed more than 30,000 people since 2014. Iran has agreed to send black boxes from a downed Ukrainian jetliner to Kiev for analysis. Tehran has until now refused to hand over the flight records of the jet it shot down on 8th of January, killing all 176 people on board. Aviation official Farhad Parvaresh said Tehran has also invited other interested countries to participate in data reading. Responding to development, Canadian Foreign Minister François-Philippe Champagne called it a step in the right direction. Talking to media, Champagne said it will transfer the boxes to France if need be. Ukrainian ambassador to Canada, Andriy Shevchenko, said Iran's announcement is an important result. 4 teenagers have been stabbed in East London, the latest in the country's string of knife attacks. Police said 3 of the victims have non-life-threatening injuries, while the condition of the 4th victim is unclear. Police say they have arrested 7 people on charges ranging including violent disorder, affray and possession of an offensive weapon. Police have now been given additional stop and search powers across Walthamstow, Leighton and Leytonstone. Scotland Yard said there was no risk to members of the public and say it was an isolated incident. In Chile, students have ramped up anti-government protests as the country marks 3 decades of democracy. The protesters clashed with police in the streets of Santiago, marking a day of civil disobedience and calling for the president to resign. President Sebastián Piñera has been under fire for the strong police response to the protests, including the use of tear gas. Earlier this week, the beating of an elderly protester by a police officer shocked the nation, with citizens calling for justice. Meanwhile, addressing an event at the presidential palace, Piñera said Chile must combat violence and care for democracy. He said the country must learn from the lessons of the past 3 decades as well as the past 5 months.
Personal de carabineros.
Personnel from the police force brutally and sadistically beat an elderly person in Santiago who was on the ground, defenseless, who represented no threat. This undoubtedly is another typical case of police abuse, of the police brutality that we have expected and which should be sanctioned and punished.
Típico.
In Turkey, the ancient town of Hasankeyf, which has stood on the banks of Tigris River for 12,000 years, is slowly drowning every day. The town, widely seen as a jewel of human history, will soon be a victim of the Ilisu Dam project. More in this report.
Hasankeyf is a city under threat. This 12,000-year-old settlement in eastern Turkey is sinking under the waters of the Tigris River, rising ever higher as a result of a controversial dam project. Its residents are trying to salvage what they can as they question what future commercial opportunities will remain.
I used to work in the tourism industry. I sold pamphlets. I told the story of this place. But unfortunately, in the last few months, no one has come here except journalists.
Some locals try to focus on the benefits the dam will bring to other parts of the region's economy, which they feel has been neglected by the Turkish government in the past.
Above all, it's good for the energy sector and for power generation. But it will also be useful and beneficial for agriculture.
The Ilisu hydroelectric dam is destined to become the second largest in the country, a huge project that has displaced many into the new Hasankeyf. For the project's critics, the dam will not only swallow up a historic city, but also erase part of the identity of this Kurdish-majority region.
When you look at the landscape, it's a clear destruction of history that we're witnessing. Did Turkey really need that dam? We keep asking that question.
With the canyon encased in concrete and water engulfing this historical landmark a little more every day, many wonder what Hasankeyf will look like tomorrow.
As the spreading tentacles of the new coronavirus choke economies across the world, global markets are tanking, hitting a near low every day, while the drastic decrease in travel has sent oil prices tumbling. Global financial institutions and the governments have pledged over $617 billion to mitigate the economic impact of the outbreak so far. More in this report.
The global economy has been rattled by the coronavirus pandemic, and the world's economic outlook is in shambles. To cushion against the economic fall, the IMF has announced a $50 billion support fund, while the World Bank committed $12 billion in aid for countries grappling with the pandemic. Earlier, the U.S. House of Representatives approved an $8.3 billion emergency fund, while President Donald Trump committed an additional $250 billion in stimulus measures. Together, European countries have committed over $81 billion in injected stimulus packages to fight the disease, while the EU has pledged over $28 billion.
We will bring forward a Corona Response Investment Fund directed at the healthcare systems, directed at SMEs, and at the labor markets, and other vulnerable parts of our economies. The instrument will be sizable and reach €25 billion quickly.
In East Asia, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore and South Korea have pledged over $30.5 billion. Down under, Australia has announced it will pump over $11.5 billion into its economy.
This package, over the course of the budget and the forward estimates, will inject some $17.629 billion into the Australian economy in a series of measures which are designed to support cash flow, boost investment and provide immediate demand stimulus to the Australian economy.
China, the epicenter of coronavirus, has announced it will inject over $170 billion as stimulus measures to fight off the virus's economic impact. Experts say it is premature to say if the hundreds of billions of dollars worth of stimulus would be enough to avoid a global economic recession.
Now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus Special.